the church is like, oh, we're all one of God and we're love of light. And I'm like, yeah, that's okay, but that's half the story. I'm evolving. And it's not that I love the Lord and I love Jesus, I do, but I'm feeling that part of man's natural state is to be hatred and darkness, not just love and light.
Right.
And I think in any given moment, we're in tension, we're in conflict as individuals, in balancing that. And sometimes that hatred and division gives way because we see a short-term opportunity that will get to our advantage. And if you see enough of those short-term opportunities, then that becomes a way of living. I like Susan's language when she said prize. Everyone sees the prize. I'm like, and so if I have to be a little negative or divisive or whatever, if it can get me my prize, if the end can justify the means, then what's so wrong with doing it?
Should we focus more on our universal human humanity and our universal human nature, the things that we share in common, which are way more than the things that actually we don't share in common, the goodness in humanity, right? Even if you're poor, or that every person has a certain level of importance and integrity as a human being. Like, should that be more of a focus and slightly downplay the differences, across all of us?
I think too often we just focus on our differences and the things that divide us. Like Marin said, she believes it's going to take tragedy for us to unite. After 9/11, the country came together. We had a sense of pride. And now you have Susan saying that she doesn't even fly her flag on the 4th of July. So what is there to be ashamed of? We're all in this country together, and we're literally allowing differences and negative things to take away our sense of pride. No, we're not perfect. Yes, we still need to make strides and focus on equality and unity. But why are we so apt to shy away from who we really are and what brings us together, if that makes sense?
Because exploitation is too profitable. It is too profitable.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's making a lot of money to divide us, right? For sure.
Conflict entrepreneurs. That's what I call
That's
them.
a great term.
I got that from somebody else, so I stole it.
That's a great term. That's a great term.
Yeah.
So Audrey, do you believe without these conflict entrepreneurs, or maybe I'll put it out to everybody, but I'm asking you first because you brought it up, it's too profitable. Do you believe without, if you could take away those conflict entrepreneurs, do you believe more of us across racial lines would see that kind of shared humanity?
No.
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 So share. Maybe Marin, why don't you're guest on the program. Why not?
I think what has led to a lot of the conflict, so I'm not saying that people aren't engineering it or feeding into it, but I do think a lot of what has led to this sort of conflict is lack of proximity to one another. I think, even us just sitting here and having this conversation across gender lines and racial lines and religious belief lines, whatever, this is very, very rare. People, for the most part, live in their own little bubble, and technology has equipped and empowered those bubbles, whether it's through social media or through your phone or anything of that sort. I mean, look at what happens when you leave your phone at home. Like, people panic and go home, and then when you're out and about during the day, how much time do you spend talking, getting to know the people around you versus texting the people on your phone or messaging the people on your phone? So I think what is happening is, people are just more and more kind of preaching to their own choirs, whatever your choir is. If it's rooted in your neighborhood, if it's rooted in your alma mater, if it's rooted in your fraternity, if it's rooted in whatever, it's just a whole bunch of bubbles, all talking to one another and feeding and getting one another like riled up about, why they're better or why they dislike that group or why that group is wrong or why that group is a threat and anything of that sort. And people aren't really coming together and having the conversations. I mean, it just makes me stop and think of, you know, some of the data out there about the low percentages of people across all racial lines who can say they have one close friend of another race. Right. So then we wonder why we're talking at each other all the time. And, you know, others are like, so I think it's a lack of proximity piece that's being fed by technology. And COVID didn't.
And
the
we are
AI is not gonna
geographically
help
sorting
either.
ourselves as well. We're geographically sorting according to ideology.
Mhm.
Like
And the
conservatives
AI
are leaving California and going to Florida and Texas.
oh, they're coming here, driving up real estate prices
Extremely.
because their homes in California are worth so much. They pay cash for homes out here.
Yeah, that is very true.
Yep.
Mhm.
Andre, you said no to the question. You said no to the question. What was your answer similar to Marin's? What's your no?
My no is people are afraid. The reason for it, people are afraid of what's different, and they focus on. It's okay to focus on our commonality, but they're also at some point begin to see the differences, and it's human nature to judge. So they'll start judging the differences, and then we'll be back and say, "Wait a minute! If with this judgment, there's an opportunity here because." You know, we can make money off of the fact that you're different and then fear around those differences. Like I just like, you know, like Todd, you know, you and I've been talking about a little bit about the sermons I hear when I YouTube church on Sundays. And, you know, like I said, the church is like, oh, you know, we're all one of God and we're love of light. And I'm like, yeah, that's okay. But that's half the story. I'm evolving. And it's not that I love the Lord and I love Jesus. I do, but I'm feeling that part of man's natural state is to be hatred and darkness, not just love and light.
Right.
And I think in any given moment, we're in tension, we're in conflict as individuals, in balancing that. And sometimes that hatred and division and, you know, gives way because we see a short-term opportunity that will get to our advantage. And if you see enough of those short-term opportunities, then that becomes a way of living. I like Susan's language when she said prize. Everyone sees the prize. I'm like, and so if I have to be a little negative or, divisive or whatever, if it can get me my prize, if the end can justify the means, then what's so wrong with doing it? And I think there's not enough consideration of part of man's natural state is to be negative.
I think it's rooted in tribalism, which is being exploited. We really want to feel like we're part of a tribe and accepted in a tribe. And
yeah,
I'm reading a book about tribalism right now, actually.
Yeah,
okay.
but I think that still that one of the solutions, Andre, lies in what you said before, with Black entrepreneurialism, and these efforts to for the Black communities to come together and like. You create a story when you get together like that, when you innovate, when you are successful in these kind of efforts, you alter the American story depending on how successful you are, right? And if there's enough of that kind of dynamic, you change America, you change what people in the long term will think about America. And there's a chance, if there's enough of these kind of successes, which I hope that it keeps going, then people start to say, okay, this country, maybe it's worth us taking some pride in again, right? So that is the kind of efforts that I really hope come about, so that we can change the narrative and take some pride. Because America is what is common to all of us, right? If we have to change that narrative and we have to make it so that we can all agree, just some, that America is a just place again, and that we are proud to be in this country, and we will all put down our tribal differences just a little bit to come together and keep it some of the good things that are here, right?
So can I feed that back to make sure I understand, Landon? What I hear you saying is that you hope with energy from what you call bottom up, that there's continued, perhaps incremental progress, but that change the facts on the ground so that we see a different image of America than the one that, for instance, Marin is concerned about, right? If you see inequality, racially, and then you have certain ideas about where that comes from, if we're able to change the facts on the ground, what we actually see over time, perhaps that narrative changes.
Yeah, right. And that's what I'm hoping, because we need that narrative to change. And I'm a football fan. I see like half the quarterbacks are now African American, and I'm like, this is something
Yeah,
new.
there was a day when they would never let a black man lead a football team.
Right, and they were not, they wouldn't give them a chance because they're not smart enough, so this I see now increasingly they might be all black eventually because there's more black interest there, right? So in these one by one, a little bit at a time, like we're changing that fabric. I see some encouraging signs, but slowly I'm hoping that this changes the narrative, so we all want to just invest a little bit more, a little bit less in tribalism, and a little bit more in our country.
Well, I think that's why we all said yes to these conversations. It's a sacrifice of our time, and we're putting ourselves out there to be judged if this ever, if we get online with this.
Oh, it's going to get on. It's going to get on very soon. It's we wanted to get this third conversation in because we're just at the point where we're going to start from your first conversations.
Yeah.
So they will be out there. And I think you're right, Susan. It is the motivation. How does it sit? Marin, how does what Landon just said sit with you in terms of incremental progress, and perhaps it'll change people's narratives?
And I completely agree. And actually piggybacking off of that, talking about the incremental progress, is important as well. And taking real note of it, because I do think we tend to focus so much on, what we still have to accomplish and the gaps that are still there. That kind of keeps us from, easing the tensions between us by saying like, hey, we still have a ways to go, but things have absolutely gotten better. So I completely agree with the incremental progress thing. I think it's just important to also tout that same progress.
Do you think that, I'll put it out to anybody, do you think that changes, this is an ongoing conversation between Andre and I, changes the wariness that might exist about what could happen tomorrow? Andre, has shared with me previously that, yeah, things might have changed, but is the motivation, are the kind of latent conflicts or ideas that we have about one another racially, do they just sit and wait for new opportunities to come out, right?
I say, yeah, they do.
And I'm wondering about, does this incremental progress, will it create more resentment from some folks, and will that just become a new part of the narrative? And I'm very sensitive, Andre, very passionately, I will say, when I was in one of our recent conversations about this, not up on the internet yet, he had me think about, Judaism and, my own sense of, how experiences and narratives have changed. And I told him, I don't fear for myself. This was, over the 2 years we've been talking. And I remember, I can't remember what I said, Andre, but you passionately almost scolded me, about, but they're still shooting up synagogues like in Pittsburgh, right? And this was my, him talking to my wondering, do the seeds always exist there? Now, obviously what we see in the last couple months, right? Around anti-Semitism. So, I'm thinking not just about the change of the narrative in terms of who can succeed in America, right? I'm also thinking about the narratives we have about one another and the wariness that sometimes can exist about motivations, right? And I know, Marin, you said you don't assume motivation, you talk about impact, and Marcus, you said something very similar, we shouldn't assume motivation. But I wonder about how do we change what we assume about one another in terms of our intentions and where we come from? Will that incremental progress do that just naturally over time?
I mean, I don't think it's going to change. I'm talking about small steps. We just need a little bit less energy directed at tribalism and a little bit more toward national unity. That's not going to happen that we're gonna all get along. That's just, it's too diverse. This democracy is too diverse, right? And so that, you know, politics will always be open battle. But can we just a little bit of a reorientation of some energy into you know, into a more cohesive, just a little bit of more cohesive vision, you know, so that we think that the battle is still worth it, you know.
I think
We'll
that can
say-
happen when we stop being threatened by those that we disagree with,
Yeah.
right? Because also to your point, Landon, when we focus on the national aspect or whatever, or even look back on our nation's greatest times and like in its history, some of it has been through just like balance, even political balance, right? There's a reason why we have a multi-party, you know, sort of system, and rather than, you know, the parties being at one another's throats and, you know, Republicans threatened by Democrats and Democrats threatened by Republicans, and, you know, everyone looking at the independents like, what are you doing? You know, like all of these different things, rather than saying that when you look back at it, it exists for a reason, for there to be checks and balances, but everyone to still be on the same page. So I don't know what it's going to take for us to stop feeling so threatened by those who think and believe in different approaches than us.
And until then,
electing leaders that exacerbate the fears.
Yeah, I want to strengthen the checks and balances aspect, because I don't want to be so subject to leaders who are going to stoke the fears. I don't want to be for us to be threatened by demagogue, you know, before we reach a more stable, hopefully, point, you know. So I'm really about, you know, Congress checking that president. You know, I really don't want the president to have that much power, and I think that they do have too much power, right? And there's ways that both parties use that power. Sometimes it's open authoritarianism on the right. On the left, you have like different ways that are not as open, right? But still, people on the right will feel threatened by those techniques, right? So, so until I really support checks and balances, and if Donald Trump becomes president, I want him checked, you know, and I want those guardrails to be strengthened. And I think we should all support that, you know. I don't want one man to have so much power over us. And so
that's why the strong federal government scares me so much, because someone like that could try to grab so much power.
Well,
I would have it
properly checked, right? Like,
properly. Yeah. I think another thing we need to do is turn off social media. Just turn it off. And I wish there would be more of a movement to just, what's that?
I said, I think it's too late, you know, the cat's out of the bag. So
the genie in the bottle.
Yeah, the genie is out of the bottle. So now we have to adapt, right? I mean,
but maybe figure out how to make it not so destructive to our relationships.
And as I want to, because I want to go expound on Susan's point, because I do, I work in tech, but I work with data engineers. The AI is not going to make it better, because now AI is driving the content. So you're just, the internet is being, the social media and the internet is being curated for us. So they just reinforce. So what may start off as some sort of initial interest, whether conservative or liberal, because of the AI, is now going to be blown up, and you're going to get nothing but feeds about that. And now that's how you radicalize people, whether you're radicalizing them for liberal causes or for conservative causes, right? Like, though, it's not going to be good.
And it's going to racially divide us more too. It's going to feed on the tribalism, I think. And
totally.
I agree with that. I think that we're taking even the small human element, we're removing it now, right? And
that's what it felt like with ChatGPT. And I was like, wait a minute. So now people aren't going to write their feelings. It's going to be generated from AI. I'm like, I don't like that.
Yeah, I think that might be a slow rolling step in the wrong direction, personally. Yeah.
Marcus, what do you think? What are your thoughts on this conversation? It looked like you were about to pipe up at some point, so I want to give you the.
Well, he mentioned ChatGPT, and I laughed because this past week, I saw a letter of recommendation someone wrote, and I said, they don't even talk like this. And so I went to ChatGPT and I said, write me a letter of recommendation in reference to this. And it literally pulled up that recommendation. It wrote it. And I was like, I knew it.
Yeah.
That's so crazy.
I wonder,
nuts.
Andre, what do you think we should do about this? Like, because this is a real, I think this is a real long-term further threat, and I don't, you know, what steps can we take?
None. I personally believe that speaking with technology, I don't know if you've ever seen this fabulous Steven Spielberg movie called Ready Player One. We're going to live in a version of Ready Player One where we're all in goggles. We're going to have ads coming at us. They're going to seem like interest stories. And we're all going to be in a version that I think it has some great application. Clearly, I love technological innovation. It's why I have the career that I do, and I find it endlessly fascinating. But it's sort of like money, right? I mean, money can be used for good or it can be used for evil, and this technology is agnostic. But when you pair it with a malevolent mind, then it can be very destructive. I mean, and now things like, for example, your credit score is partially now going to be determined by AI. The credit people are trolling your social media to see your friends, who are the people you're linked in with. So for me, and maybe because I don't do optimism very well, I don't know what to do, but I think what we have to do, I think every one of us needs to endeavor to understand the technology that undergirds our lives. And we all need to start to develop our individual personal boundaries, whether it's, limiting your social media time. And then we need to push those who pass the laws to also recognize and to employ some boundaries around that stuff. I'll never forget watching a few years ago Mark Zuckerberg testify about what was then Facebook in front of Congress. And he seemed humble enough, but I could tell because I know how technical all this stuff can get because it's my job to implement a lot of this stuff. And I'm like, he was thinking, in my opinion, how can you make laws around something that you barely understand? Because one, congressperson was comparing Facebook to Ford, like, I know that when Ford makes a car, it's the same car or whatever. I'm like, that's completely not that's the wrong analogy. You're talking about technology that in and of itself is adaptive. And in order to keep people engaged, it's not supposed to be the same social media experience for Andre versus Todd. It has to be adaptive so it can stylize to keep people on the screen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So then we have to develop cultural norms, especially around kids. To me, it's like right now, kids live in the virtual wild, wild west,
Yes.
And yet we can't let them go play with the neighbors anymore because we got to watch where they're going. It's like this is upside down to me, right?
Yep.
So we have to adapt culturally to say, these are adult kind of things, and we want a full human experience for the kids to play with their neighbors, to be out, doing healthy activities, not being engaged into a virtual machine that eventually is just driven by money, right?
Another thing, just to circle back to the concept of justice, the AI is coming into the justice system where they're going to use AI to start recommending sentencing. Yeah. And the AI is going to take into account not only priors and stuff, but this sort of, how would you say, a probability that you would be a recidivist offender of any kind.
Yeah, that's I mean, humans make a lot of mistakes, but that scares me more than a human.
The AI is in the justice system.
It scares me too.
It's expanding.
So I'm hearing
we're fucked.
I want to become an Amish.
No, I'm hearing when I think about, so I'm hearing part of what can lower the temperature. Let me deviate from AI for a second. What I'm hearing, and I'll circle back. What I'm hearing is part of lowering the temperature is lowering the power of the prize. I'm hearing that part of what lowers the temperature is somehow, and I don't know how this happens, engagement, right? Marin, to your comment about how isolated we are, because we don't feel threatened by what we know, what we truly know, right? By as you just put it, Landon, the virtual perception of the world, right? When we interact as humans, we find those common points of humanity and maybe can have more trust. You know, because I don't care if you have power if I know you have my best interest in mind. If I can trust you, I give you some power, you know, maybe not ultimate power, but I give you some more power to do things that might be right. And so I hear from Marin's side this engagement that allows for some trust, you know, that if there's an administration that might be different from mine, okay, maybe we lower the power that they have, but they're still going to have authority. And maybe I can trust you with that authority because I know you care about me in some way. And so I hear a little bit of that. And that I think gets into some of the chat GPT, right? Chat GPT having more power, bad, you know, chat GPT having less understanding and just trying to reproduce because it uses data that comes from, you know, that comes from the past, right? It's a way of taking the past and replicating it into the future in some ways, and we don't know how the black box works. And so, you know, if ChatGPT has a lot of power and also doesn't have this ability to connect and develop greater understanding, you know, that might be its downfall, right? Just as it is with us as humans. And so I'm hearing some of that. I'm hearing what I've heard is that there is validity in making sure that no one is determined by where they're born in terms of the basic resources that they have to not just live a, you know, sustained life, but to at least have the potential to live a thriving life if they so choose, but that there's some sense in which you can provide that to someone. And as Marcus said, you just can't make them be motivated to use it. Right. You can try to put the teachers in there as Andres, you know, experienced the people who will affirm them and give them motivation. But at the end of the day, they're still going to have to make a choice. I heard some of that as some of the big picture things that I'm taking away, that it sounds like we're generally maybe different approaches, maybe different ideas, maybe different backgrounds, but we're generally feel are kind of important things to bring to the conversation of racial equity. Am I hearing those things right? Do you push back against anything? Did I miss anything really critical in terms of the big pieces that we seem to be circling around?
I think you pretty well summarized. And I think there's a lot more common ground here that we've discovered than I thought I might have coming into it.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Okay, but now I want to take that to the next step, because one of the things I do with this show is I take it to the street, and which means I openly discuss it with strangers when I'm drinking. So now that you have this awareness, what are you, okay, Andre, are you willing to make a commitment to take this awareness into your daily lives, and as opportunities come up for you to expand the heart of another person, or even to go deeper within yourself vis-a-vis this awareness, are you committed to doing that?
I am, you know, and it takes, you know, you wade into the hate machine and you get stuff stuck to you. You get upset. You get so you just have to step out and wash yourself off and say, I'm not a hateful person, you know.
You do.
And so I have to do that. You got to. So I think that's number one, because it's so easy to get pulled in and not to be able to get out, you know.
Yes.
Because all of us have our trigger points, and so first can we do that on a regular basis and just really make the deep commitment that we're not hateful people, and number two, can we project, you know, this to those around us, that you know, let's focus on, that's why I say human universalism, let's focus on common humanity when we can, you know.
And step into difficult conversations sometimes, and it takes a little courage to do that, but to try to lean into that a little more, because I think we have to.
Yeah.
And I think these conversations have helped me with that. And I think this is a muscle that I need to develop more. And yeah.
If we want to achieve what Landon has stated, we're going to have to step into these difficult conversations.
Yeah.
Totally.
Agreed. I agree.
Yeah, and then Landon talked about kind of separating oneself. I think there's a kind of questioning element that exists too, like you did, Susan, with that experience. First of all, I really appreciate you sharing that experience up front that you had. And you know, we're all walking around with our narratives, from our history, right? And it built in there is all sorts of associations, and it's really hard to, as Landon just said, step back, especially to things that feed that, right? But even if we step back, we can have moments like we're not expecting, like Susan had, and I think there's a lot of benefit in questioning oneself, and saying, where did that come from? Is that the true reality? Was I responding to the true reality? And if not, why? And I really, anyways, I wanted to send my appreciation over to you, Susan, for sharing that,
Thanks.
because I think it's hard to do. It's hard to share those moments and to be willing to question yourself in those moments. But I think we need to do that a lot, around the assumptions we make about people and the country, and yeah.
And I think coming into it with this, trying to have more of a sense of humility is part of it.
Yeah.
Tap into that humility,
Yeah, I think it's the humility, and to Landon's point, finding where there is common ground.
Yeah.
Because I oftentimes think it's easier to have difficult conversations if you start, or at some point kind of check in with where the common ground is.
Yeah. Do you get worried sometimes, Marion, about that process, being an avoidance strategy of kind of important conflicting ideas to discuss those? Do you get worried?
I completely, yes. And because I would say oftentimes, and this is, I think, part of the tribal sort of behavior, is villainizing those who are disagreeing with us to the point that you make it seem as if there is no common ground, right? You know, when you take a step back and you read some of the more divisive, or hear some of the more divisive political statements, whether it's about the right talking about the left, or the left talking about the right, it's so villainous and outrageous. They try to make it seem like, they don't even believe in children being safe, stuff like that, where you're just like, I don't think that's the case. It's almost like trying to blow up any common ground, rather than, all right, we all agree children should be safe. Now let's talk about, where we're differing. So that's what.
But to me, that speaks to Susan's talking about the prize, and Todd saying lowering the importance of the prize. They're willing to make something so egregious like that, they don't believe in children's safe because it's going to get me the White House or the Senate or whatever.
Yeah, it's also scary. Like, to have those situations happen, you admit it's scary, because those other people that you're talking to, they're also scared, or else they're so angry that they've completely overcome their fear. But right. So, somebody has to reach out and make themselves a little bit naked, like we have to, you know what I mean? Like, you have to put yourself at risk a little bit. I wish it was easier, but it isn't,
And the anger is rooted in fear. I think it's a symptom of fear.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Remember we were talking about that the hatred is love turned inward. It's love boundary, with boundaries.
With boundaries. Yeah. That's what I worry, I mean, just again, to put my cards on the table with regard to worry of decentralization of the bottom up approach, which, if you know me and you know my history, is like the core of who I am. I like bottom up, but I have this incessant worry about the things I shared before, but also because we're so segregated that, to the extent that we localize things, we have less chance to do things together, right? If we are segregated. Like, I want, I asked Andre about universalistic approaches to policy, for instance. And, I take seriously his response, which is in his heart of hearts, he'd agree that everyone, regardless of color, background, whatever, should have their needs met, right? That we should take these universal approaches. The concern was that what kind of bias will make its way into that kind of system, right? Where it's universal in its intention, right? Or in its words, but in deeds, who gets the short end of the stick, right? And what I hear that is one of basic trust, of basic trust, and maybe some wisdom, right? Maybe some wisdom as well, but also trust. And if we're not able to do things together on a bigger level of society, right? If it's we're all doing things so locally and we're segregated, I worry about where are those stories of people coming to each other's aid and showing care and across racial boundaries.
Yeah.
Right?
Agreed.
Those are some of the things I worry about in going so much to the ground level, because I want, you know, I'll share another part of our story of our conversation that's somewhat relevant. You know, Andre has shared multiple times in this conversation about learning to communicate in certain circles, right? In a certain way. And Maren, you were a big part of that, you know. And I heard him talk about him talking in his local vernacular, his local way, you know, his natural way from where he came from, and being rebuffed in college, as he put it. You know, people seeing him in certain ways because of the way he talked, right? Which was just so natural to him. And I said to him, you know, and this is a true story. I said to him, I said, you know, I used to come back because, you know, I don't know if you all know, we were roommates. We just not just we knew each other in college. We were roommates, freshman roommates. And I used to go back during our freshman year and naturally start using his sayings in probably his tonality, you know, and people loved it. My white circles, right? It was like there was like a joy there, and I was like, Andre, they weren't laughing at you. They were actually like the way you expressed yourself brought joy to them. But you never got to see that. You never got to see that. You never got to see the 50 to 100, you know, people in my white circle, you know, who just would love who you are and being your natural self, right? I just don't want us to be in our own corners, you know, trying to lift ourselves up. I want some of that engagement across lines so that we can experience and witness, you know, that common humanity happening. That's a little bit of what I get concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that. Yeah, completely.
I mean, it happens in institutions like I feel a camaraderie with all the people in the high school boundaries. You know, we all have kids there, right? There's a certain camaraderie. You know, you feel a camaraderie with the people that you go to church with, right? You feel that camaraderie with certain charity organizations or service organizations, right? You know, to me, those are the things that come to mind to facilitate that at a local level, right? I think that, you know, but those are still not very comprehensive, right? So is there anything else that can augment that? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Any last thoughts that you all have? Marcus, everyone else chimed in at the end. You have your last word on how you take this all in?
Take us home, Marcus.
I think it is a conscious effort. As Miss Susan started us off when she had her experience with the guy yelling, and she took a moment to step back and reflect on it. So I think we just have to be conscious and aware of our own biases and how we treat people and each other, and just try to put a better foot forward each day. So,
especially when it comes to confirmation bias. I remember Maren once told me, be careful of like testing people because you're usually going to find the thing you're looking for. And I've had to learn to not do that and to be cognizant of my own confirmation bias. And the time I'm looking, instead of me accepting a situation, I'm looking to be right. Which I often do, because I love being right.
Who doesn't?
Thank you for watching this episode of Healing Race, and stay with us for a scene from our next video.
If you want to see more conversations like the one you just watched, please subscribe to our channel, share this video with friends and family, and like and comment on the video below.
If you'd like to be a guest on one of our episodes and have an open, real conversation about race, email us at guests@healingraceshow.com.
And if there are topics you think we should cover, we'd love to hear them. So please email your ideas to topics@healingraceshow.com.
As always, thanks for your support. We look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Now, here's a scene from our next Healing Race.
The rabbi had given a speech about, you know, whoever wants to move into the neighborhood, it should be able to move into the neighborhood, no matter what color, blah, blah, blah. People actually got up at High Holy Holiday services, and walked out.
Okay.
Not everybody, but a bunch of people. And I remember writing a letter to the rabbi. I was in college at the time, saying I was appalled. I said, this is a religious institution and these people were irreligious, you know? And so that's kind of my background. And yet I've had really some complicated relationships with, you know, Black people over time.
Here's what's been bothering me. So, and Todd, I'm so happy you're Jewish, because remember when Whoopi Goldberg got all that backlash and because she said something that, when she said it, because I think I was actually watching The View that day, and she said it, and I was like, I don't think you're supposed to say that, but I get why she thinks that Jewish people are white. If you don't believe that you are white, you don't claim Caucasian.
Yeah.
And then you get to walk through the world. And I have an aunt who's like, I mean, if you did not look at her hard, if you passed by her, you would think she was a white woman. She has been in spaces and people have said things and she had to say something because they thought she was white and thought, you know, she was in. And she had to let them quickly know, like, oh, no, that's not okay. And so it's like, but if she wanted to, she could choose. She could make the choice to be that close to the construct of whiteness and live her life a little more peacefully. But I just, it just confuses me that there seems to be this blindness around how close to the construct of whiteness people are. And it's not just Jewish people, there's a lot of people.
To watch the rest of that episode, go ahead and click the video below me.
To see a different compelling Healing Race episode, you can click the video below me. We look forward to seeing you in the next video.